Pastor Keion Henderson. I'm excited to be here today to talk about The Shift. This is a new book from you, Courageously Moving from Season to Season. And I think this book is so timely, it's so necessary right now as so many people are finding themselves in possibly uncertain and even painful times. But this is all about getting through those seasons and turning that pain into a bit of power, right?
Yeah. You know, when I wrote the book, I tell people all the time, I wrote it because I didn't have any other place to put the pain. You know, you live life and you figure out how to survive and how to make it. And looking back at the origin of my genesis into the earth, where we started was never an indicator of where I ended up. Born to a mother who worked at Taco Bell and made $7 an hour and raised 4 children, I couldn't have imagined that God would have shifted us from where we were. So this book is just like that journey to tell people not to be in competition with Michael Jordan, not to be in competition with Oprah Winfrey, not to be in competition with Tyler Perry or anybody like that. This is not about being like somebody else. This is a roadmap on how to become the best version of you.
That's so important. And you know, you also touch on the hard work, because I think sometimes when we go through situations, we think, I'm just going to pray about it, turn it over to God. But you're also telling people we have to stop and do the work to get through that transition. Yeah,
see, I'm from Gary, Indiana, right? So Steel Town, you know, everybody knows Gary for the Jackson 5. Unfortunately, I never met any of them. But Gary is a pull yourself up by the bootstrap, work your way out. 40% economic empowerment, or the lack thereof, I should say, 40% unemployment. You've got, at one point in time when I was growing up, we were considered the murder capital of the world. You understand that? Like, of the world, not just of the United States. They were saying that more people per capita were killed in the city that I grew up in. In fact, there was a statistic that one agency had released at our school when I was in middle school going into high school, that the average age of a person in our neighborhood for a black man was 21. That means that for the average person on the street I grew up that I should have been gone about 14, 15 years ago. So that work ethic, where we had a dishwasher but mama didn't let us use it. We had to wash our cars with dish detergent if we had a car. We had to hand wash our clothes in the tub and then hang them on the backs of chairs. We had so many roaches in our house. One time I remember that every month we had to set off these fog bombs in the house, and we knew that if mom took us out for about 4 hours, that meant that we were killing all the roaches and then all of the fog would be gone when we came back. I grew up in that, and so that grit and tenacity showed me that life is not given to you. And I don't care if you are rich or poor. Jonathan, you know this for sure, that the poor people have to work hard, but those who are rich are trying to teach their children how to work hard so that they understand that the silver spoon can tarnish. So working hard is a strategy, no matter what the economic status is, no matter what the socioeconomic status is, no matter what the education level is. You got to work at it to be successful.
And you talk about not just your struggles growing up, you know, back home as a young boy, but also even into adulthood, that you've gone through multiple seasons. How was it for you to actually be honest and go back and unpack some of that pain? Because, you know, a lot of times when we go through stuff, we're like, look, I'm done with that. I don't want to visit it again. But you, in this book, you go back and really unpack that.
Yeah, I'm too flawed to be embarrassed. I don't know where that comes from. People ask me all the time, where does that come from? Or I get a lot of direct messages or tweets. People will say, thank you for being so transparent. Jonathan, I don't know any other way to be. I've never been able to hide behind flaws and fallacies. I think that one of the prohibitors that keeps people from being effective is not actually showing the authentic them or telling the true story. Nobody wants to hear you tell them that you woke up one day and all of a sudden you were here, because where is the roadmap and where is the hope for me? I don't know any other way to be other than to tell people, listen, grew up without a father in the home. My mother got pregnant twice by the pastor of the church. Now, granted, at the time that we were conceived, my father was separated from his wife, and she lived in an entirely different state. So my mom and father thought they were actually going to be together. His wife returns, and my mother, being the woman that she is, suggested that he try to work out his marriage, and she took us and raised us. I grew up in a church where my father stood in the pulpit and preached about taking care of his family every day, while my mother and I and my sister were sitting in the audience on WIC and welfare catching the bus to church. That was shameful. When you come through that, when you walk around grocery stores spending food stamps, when your car is so beat down and raggedy that it cuts off at the basketball court when your mom's picking you up in front of your friends, when your pants are 2 inches above your shoes and your shirt is so dried from the dryer, that's when I learned that clothes shrink. Yeah. When you have to share clothes with your baby sister and you wear the outfit Monday and Tuesday and she wears it Wednesday and Thursday, you lose shame. And so that part of my life has prepared me for this part of my life. Because I sat in the shadows of shame, I can now stand in the light of confidence.
But was it painful to go back and relive and, sort of not only relive and really think about it, but also to put that into paper, knowing that you are sharing it, but also encouraging others?
Yeah, if I had to give you the original manuscript, you would have seen teardrops on certain paragraphs. What you have is a finished book. It went through the editing process. See, I didn't touch those pages. I didn't touch that cover. I didn't touch that wrapping. That came from the publisher. It came from the printer. If I would have given you the original pages or the tablet in which I typed some of this stuff on, you could have done a DNA swab and you would have found out that those were my tears. Those were, I remember writing in some places I had to look back and see that the writing was darker in certain chapters because I was so angry. I was pressing harder than I was in other areas. So it was extremely difficult, but I didn't write it for me. I wrote it for you, and I wrote it for the people who are watching us, and I wrote it for the people who follow us on social media, and I wrote it for the thousands and the tens of thousands that God has given me the opportunity to stand in front of. And so I had to climb over my pain because I wasn't doing it for me, I was doing it for them.
You know, one of the things I heard you talk about in a previous sermon when you were talking about shifting, you talked about humbling ourselves and letting go of the ego, the arrogance, because a lot of times when we go through things, we immediately point the finger at somebody else. Yeah. It's somebody else's fault. How important is it when we get to that low of lows, those valley moments, to really let go of all that other stuff that is in us?
Yeah, you have to, because you're already low, and then what you're holding on to is weight. Yeah. And that's called a depression. You see, right now, as you and I are recording this world is in isolation. We're in quarantine. You and I, who normally meet each other with a hug or greet each other with a handshake, we had to bump elbows because of this social distancing thing. And now I just read a report yesterday that domestic violence is higher than it has ever been in recent times because people are now forced to deal with issues. You know, it is a difficult thing. To try to deal with the weight of life. It is a difficult thing, but that's what this book, The Shift, is entitled to answer, that you can continue in life despite the fatigue that it presents. You can actually do it if you try, but it's going to be work, and you can't be spoiled, and you can't be arrogant, and it can't always be somebody else's fault. You have to understand that if you're in a marriage right now and it is difficult, that all of your difficulties as it relates to your personality did not start the day you married your spouse. Neither did theirs start the day that they married you. All of the pain that is in you and I, and those of us who will watch this, psychologists say that all of our pain is baked in by the time we're 12. Every decision that we'll make, every hurt that we will struggle to overcome, is a result of unresolved issues between the ages of 2 and 12. Think about that, that it is not the person's fault at the grocery store that got in front of me in the parking lot that made me lose my temper. I had a temper problem when I was 3 years old, throwing down the rattle or trying to snatch the toy away from somebody because I wanted it. Now, I didn't want to play with it. I just didn't want anybody else to have it. These are not new issues. And so when you have that perspective and you know that God gives and he takes away, where can arrogance abound? Where can the onset of the lack of humility find its place? When you really boil yourself down to it, you're nothing but filthy rags. And let me tell you this, I laugh at people who wear white all the time. It's one of my favorite jokes. People wear white and then they look at the collar and then they say, oh my God, how did I get dirty? I have to remind them, you're dirt.
Yeah.
That dirt on that white shirt didn't come from somebody else.
The dry
it
cleaners
came from you.
They can't get
They can't get it out.
Yeah.
If you ever notice, it's the only part that stays dirty. Why? Because it's the part that's on you.
Yeah, I never thought about that, but that's so true. That is so true. Let's talk about some other things in the book in terms of preparing for the next moment, because a lot of times we go through something, we get out of it, but there's going to be another transition period in our lives.
Yeah.
Just because you got through one, there may be another one 5 years or a week from now. Even the situation, as you mentioned, we're in now, a lot of people, most of us didn't see it coming and getting this bad in terms of COVID-19, and a lot of people who are having booming businesses, they're out of work now, not knowing where their next paycheck is coming from. How can we be better prepared for that next thing that might come in our lives?
Yeah, man, and that is a great question, because you should expect it. There's an old song the church used to sing, time is filled with swift transitions. You have to expect transitions. The problem with most of us, I'll even say it with our government. Here we are with nearly 350 million people. And I just read a report that we only had 15 to 20,000 ventilators in stock. Well, what that says is not that we don't have the ability to make them. It means that we're controlling market because of supply and demand. But crises do not care about profit. So you have to be prepared. The worst time to build a house is in a storm. You can't wait until the wind is blowing, until the lightning is flashing, until the waters are rising to decide, oh, I'm going to build a house. It's too late. You've got to build it before the storm. So the best way to handle a shift is to know that one is coming. Put money aside because something is going to happen to the market. Spend time with your children because one day you may start a business and you may not be able to. Make sure that you put the boards on the window before the hurricane comes, because the wind will blow away the board if you try to do it during the storm.
Wow, that's important to that preparation. You know, reading this book, what do you hope that people take away? Because not everybody is a Christian. Not everybody goes to church every Sunday. Not everybody reads the Bible, but there's still so much in this book that is applicable to everyone's lives regardless.
And I hope I don't sound callous when I say this, but I did not write this book for the church. I use biblical principles because of my faith, and it is the substratum from which I draw my strength and information. But if you read that book, this is not the Bible light. This is not a reference to Scripture. There are real life situations in there, whether it is chapter 1, death, divorce, and daddy issues. That don't have nothing to do with worship. It has to do with the first 3 most traumatic things that I've gone through in my life. I want your father, who owns restaurants in the Atlanta airport and has to lay off workers because people are not flying, to read this and say, I'm in a shift. Yeah. I want the billionaire that I just read who just had to lay off several thousand workers because of times being tough, to read this and say, it's just called a shift. I want people to understand around the world, whether they have aprons on in the Waffle House or whether they own the factory that makes the apron. I want them to understand that it is only a shift, and that while we are living in the meantime, understanding that the meantime is a meantime, and that you don't have to expect life to be kind, and that you don't have to expect life to do you any favors. Everything that I have ever done in my life with the help of God, I had to do it under the strength of the anointing. I had to do it under the strength of power. Aside from religious jargon, I had to do it from a business perspective. I went to school to be a businessman before I ever took a theological class. I am the substratum of multiple people and multiple thoughts and schools and personalities. So I didn't write this just for the church, although it will be useful for them. I wrote it for people of the faith, not of the faith. I wrote it for the businessman. I wrote it for the single mother. I wrote it for the struggling father. I wrote it for the entrepreneur. I wrote it for the rapper. I wrote it for the athlete. I wrote it for everybody.
Yeah, because a lot of us, we don't think we'll need it until we really do.
Yeah.
A lot of times we think our lives are great. We got that great job. We got that great spouse. We got everything's going good. And then suddenly something happens, and then we actually find ourselves in a position we never thought we'd be in.
Yeah, trust me, you'll want to read this book because there's another storm coming, and this book will help you to prepare for for the next one.
All right, so The Shift, courageously moving from season to season. Pastor Keion, you guys got to get this book. Where can people find it? I know it's everywhere, but tell people where they can get it.
We've done this to just make it easy. Go to KeionHendersonBook.com. It'll show you all of the different places where you can get it. You can follow us on @Pastor Keion on all of our social media websites, and you can stay abreast on what we're doing. We've been giving books away. I've even been toying with the idea, and which camera can I talk to? Because I want to make sure I talk to them directly. This one here. Listen, we've even been looking at doing something. I talked to the publisher, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it, Jonathan, but I'm really trying to twist their arm. They're saying because of COVID-19 and people being laid off, that they're actually going to consider allowing us to do a special where if one book is $20, they're saying that we could possibly do 2 for $30, $35.
Okay,
so that'll be great. Hopefully I can do that. Your response will let me know if I can convince them to do it. If you respond, they'll do it. They need the help just like everybody else.
Yeah, let's support this book. Pastor Keion, thanks as always. I can't give you a handshake, so I'll just do
listen,
let's
like figure out what's a virtual bump.
Yeah, like a,
all right,
we'll just do that. We'll figure something out. Pastor Keion, The Shift. Thank you, guys.